morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah. We are on Daf Chaf Aleph, Amud Aleph. 9 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, for Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, and for Nisim Ben Miriam, that should all have Refuah Shelema B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Also, we dedicate our learning to the current situation of fire in California and Los Angeles. Multiple different fires. Many from people have been evacuated from their homes. Should be B'ezrat Hashem with Rachamei Shamayim. The fires should stop and should be able to go back to their homes with health and resume life as normal. B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This week's learning of the community has been dedicated by Shea family, Dayan family, and Kohen family. An ultimate school for all the Mishpachot B'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we are continuing on the first Mishnah of a person that's sleeping under a bed in the Sukkah, whether or not it's said. We have the Mishnah that said, if you sleep under the bed, Lo yatzai yedei chovato. Rabbi Yehuda said, well, we would do that in front of Zekarim, and they said nothing to us. And Rabbi Shimon also brought his own story that Rabbi Gamliel said about his Evet, Tavi, Avdosh Rabbi Gamliel, that he would go to sleep under the bed when the Zekarim would be there in order to give room for people who are chayav to sleep in Sukkah, indicating that A, Avadim are patur from Sukkah, and B, that a person sleeps under a bed in the Sukkah, lo yatzai lechovato, that he has not done his obligation. That was our Mishnah. We got into a discussion about the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who said, if you have a ohel that has not been made by a human being, is not an ohel. It has to be man-made to be considered an ohel. He had a gezerah shavah. He learned it from ohel in the Mishkan. That has to be done by men, and therefore anything that's not man-made, Rabbi Yehuda said, is not considered an ohel. So we went to ask a question on him by the Mishnah that discusses the process of Ether Paradumah, that Chachamim had a leniency that a Tvulyom could actually burn the Paradumah after Shkita, because they wanted to make sure that people do not flock after the Stukim who said, Stukim were more Machmir. They said, oh no, these Chachamim are not frum enough. Can't have Tvulyom, and they Bedavka would make the Kohen Tameh and make him a Tvulyom in order to be able to do the Efer Paradumah. And in order to make up for the leniency that they instituted, they would go in lengths that you can't even imagine, of Chumrah on top of Chumrah on top of irrational Chumras, to show that we're not lenient. It's not because of that. We are fighting a battle with the Tzdukim, and part of this, combined and I guess irrational Chumrah on top of Chumrah, compounded Chumras, was that they would create a settlement of wives of Kohanim who were pregnant on top of a solid piece of rock that no one could be really buried, no kever could be there. And even that, they would elevate it one tefach. This whole settlement was basically built on top of pillars that elevated the bottom, at least the tefach, and even if it would be a kever there, the tum'ah would come there and stop by the base of the settlement, which was elevated the tefach from the ground. And the wives of Kohanim would give birth there, raise the children. They had chadarim and yeshivot and rabbanim and pulpit rabbis, and everything was there. They raised the community of baby Kohanim there until they were old enough, and then they would send them to Meshilach, which is the water you would take for Efer Paradumah, and there we had a machloket. The Gemara said that they would have these cows, and they would put a delet a door horizontally that would affix it to this cow, to the saddle, whatever it was, and the boy would sit on top of this, would go to Meshiloach, will come down to draw water, will go back up, and then it would go to the Beit HaMikdash where they had to deliver this water, which was drawn by stone vessels, which also is now Mekabel Tumah. Right? They would go down, or the Gemara said, we had a machloket, maybe they didn't even go down, they stayed on top, and they just would let down with a rope the stone, and then they would pull it back up, and they would take the water in. Rabbi Yehuda says, no doors. They would just sit on the cow. And the cow itself is fat enough and big enough and wide enough to be an ohel, that if there is any tum'ah beneath, the tum'ah would stop. We mentioned before that if you have an ohel, which is a tefach elevated from the ground, even if you have a kever, even if you have a corpse underneath, if you have a solid ohel, a good ohel here, the tum'ah would hit this, spread beneath it everywhere, but it would not penetrate up. So if you have this door and the boy is sitting on top, then even if you pass over a kever, the boy is good. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no door. The cow itself is the ohel. The stomach of the cow is elevated a good tefach from the ground. And when it walks, even if you pass over a kever, the tum'ah does not reach the boy sitting on top. So the Gemara said, wait a second. The cow is a natural creature. It is not man-made. And yet, Rabbi Yehuda says, this is a good ohel. So how is that a good ohel? So the Gemara said, Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if you have an ohel that is bigger than a large man's fist, then doesn't make a difference if it's natural, if it's man-made, it's a good ohel. He only disagrees with a small ohel, which is a tefach. That cannot be natural, it has to be man-made. That's the answer that we read at the very end of yesterday's Gemara. So we're going to continue on that. Says the Gemara, Amar ki ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Usually Rav Dimi is saying things in the name of Rabbi Yochanan because the Rosh Hashiva in the time of Rav Dimi in Eretz Yisrael was Rabbi Yochanan. Right? Rabbi Yochanan is the author of Talmud Yerushalmi, is the Rosh Hashiva in Eretz Yisrael, and his two legendary students were Resh Lakish, who was his chavruta, and Rabbi Elazar, who became his chavruta after Resh Lakish died. Rabbi Elazar used to be called, especially after the death of Rabbi Yochanan, it was called Mara de Ara de Yisrael. He was the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. So here is Rabbi Dimi in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Modeh Rabbi Yehuda Kimlo Egrof, that Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if you have an ohel that is as large as a man's fist or larger, then you could have it even in a natural form. So therefore, a stomach of a cow, the shidra of a cow is for sure larger than an egrof, and that is going to be fine. Tanya Nami Hachi, we also learned this in a Braita. Umodeh Rabbi Yehuda b'shekifin u'b'nikikei haselaim. We spoke about Rabbi Yehuda in the beginning with the holes, small holes in the walls and in the ground. And the Braita says that's only by small holes in the ground and in the walls that Rabbi Yehuda says has to be man-made. But b'shekifin u'b'nikikei haselaim, then you have large pieces of stone, rocks, that they get detached from the mountain with the wind, with the natural disasters, whatever it is. Those holes that are created and the ohel that you have now is considered ohel according to Rabbi Yehuda. Also, even though it's not man-made, it is completely naturally created, it's still considered an ohel. Fine. Now we have an issue. The issue is, now that we established that an ohel that is man-made is good if it's large, why does Rabbi Yehuda hold that you can't have a door? What's the problem with the door on top of the cow? Remember, we said this boy is sitting on a door on a cow, going to take the water. bother. And Rabbi Yossi says, no door. What's the problem? If we say the door is not an ohel because it's not man-made, that would be one thing. But now we said Rabbi Yehuda is okay with man-made, not man-made, everything is good. So what's the problem with this door? Says the Gemara, "V'haredelet deyesh bach kama egrofim v'katani Rabbi Yehuda omer lo hayu mevi'in delator." Why does Rabbi Yehuda say they would not bring doors on top of the cows? Ela shvarim, only the cow themselves. So Amar Abaye, it's going to be Masechet Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, who says Rabbi Yehuda is against doors? He's not against doors. He's just saying you don't need doors because the cow itself is good enough. The cow is fat, good, big. It's going to cover the area that the boy is sitting, and therefore you're going to be good. You don't need a door. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. Rava says, no, Rabbi Yehuda is against doors. Why? For a practical reason. Because boys are boys. And you know what they're going to do? Because imagine, these boys have been raised in the settlements outside of playing with nature. They've never been outside. This is the first time they're getting out, right? On a cow, on a ride. So, what do you think is going to happen if they have this door? They're going to feel comfortable sitting there. It's like a nice VMO is going by itself, and the seat that they have is wide and nice and safe. So they're going to start playing around, poking their head out, see what's beneath it. Maybe you could also add to it that the door blocks their vision a little bit. So they want to see what's happening outside this. Sticking their feet, dangling their feet out, sticking their hand out, their head out, and all you need is a kever there, and all years of your hard work that's it, in the thin air. So says Rabbi Yehuda, don't do it. Let them sit on top of the cow itself and be a little insecure, because not as, whoever has sat on a cow before, the movement of everything, you're going to feel very uncomfortable. You're going to just sit tight because you don't want to fall. So therefore, don't secure any saddle, any door on top of it. Let them sit tightly and don't play around and stick their hand and the limbs outside the parameters of the body of this thing. You don't want anything protruding outside, and therefore, you will be good. That's the reason, says Rava. Let's read it inside. Rava Amar, 3 lines up, Lo hayu mevi'in delatot kol ikar. No, Rabbi Yehuda is against having a door. Shemiperesh ta'to shel tinok gasalav. When you feel comfortable on top of this door, feels like a limousine that you're sitting on. So then, Shema yotzi rosho, or had me'evarav, he's going to maybe stick his head out, his other body parts out, and you're going to pass by a kever, ve'itameh, and he's going to become tameh bekever at the home, in a potential kever that was there before, and therefore we don't let it. Tanya quoted Rava, and we learned in a Braita exactly like Rava. Now, in other words, we have Rabbi Yehuda, who's a Tana. We don't know which one is his reasoning. We have Masechet Abaye and Rava, and now we have a Braita, a Tanaic work that says exactly like Rava, and basically does away with Abaye. Says the Braita of Yehuda Omer, Lo hayu mevi'in delatot kol ikar. They would not, but davka they would not bring doors on top of these cows. Mipeneh sheda'ato shel tinok gasa alav, because the kid is going to feel comfortable sitting on top of the door. Shema yotzi rosho echad me'evarav. Maybe it's going to stick out one of his head or one of his limbs, and it's going to become a problem of tum'ah tameh bekever hatos. That's exactly like Rav. Says the Braita going on, they would bring fat cows from Mitzrayim, like talking about last week's parasha, the Chalom of Paro, like the healthy, good ones. They would bring these Shvarim Misrim that are wide and nice. This boy would sit on top, Rechavot, their stomach is wide and nice. His boys would sit on top of them. bekosot shel even beidehem. They would have this stoneware vessels. Hegiu leshiloach yardu mileum. They would go down. They would fill up the water. They would come up and they would go to deliver the water for me chatat, for efer paraduma. Fine.
Rabbi, isn't there legs being laid down when they're sitting on oxen?
Yeah, but again, the top of the oxen works like this. Like the middle of the cow is the widest area. So his legs ended here, and you still have the width of the cow itself, protruding from two sides, covering completely. If you would pass by kever, you would have the entire body of the boy covered by the body of the cow. Fine. So says the Gemara. Now we have another problem. We go back. Now we're circling back to our Mishnah. Remember what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda said we would go sleep under the beds in front of the zekenim, and they said nothing. Remember that? Now, nice story. Chazak Baruch. Let's analyze the story. Let's ask everyone around the tables here. If you would have this bed that you're sleeping underneath as a halachically valid ohel, would that make it invalidate? That's now that you're not sleeping under the sukkah because you're under an ohel, right? You remember we had this Rabbi Yosef and Abaye. Rabbi Yosef was last week, right? They were sleeping under kilat chatanim in the sukkah, and the whole lumdut was that the kilat chatanim is not considered an ohel. That's why it does not take away from me being in the sukkah. But if I actually have a good tent, that I go under this tent in the sukkah, then I'm not in the sukkah, I'm in this tent. Right? So if this bed is considered an ohel, then you're ruined. So now let's get back to what we just learned from Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda just said that if you have this door on top of a cow, it's considered an ohel, right? So if I'm under the bed, and the bed is 10 tefachim high, is that an ohel or not? Yes. Absolutely yes. So I don't care what the Zikarim said or didn't say. Why didn't they say something? You're literally sleeping under a wooden solid piece of structure, which is considered quote unquote an ohel, and you want that to be kasher? How in the world is that valid that you're sleeping in the sukkah and you're under a bed? So that's the question of the Gemara. The bed is nice, it's wide. Kama egrofin, many fist width. And we learned the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we would go sleep under the beds in front of the zekenim, and they said nothing. So it says the Gemara, no. Beds are much worse than the doors or the cow even, or anything else. Much worse. It's not considered an ohel, but it is, but it's not. What's the difference between an ohel, a regular ohel, and this bed? Well, the glaring obvious difference is an ohel, a tent, is made to serve the area underneath it. That's why it's called the ohel. You go inside the ohel, it's made for protection inside of it. A bed is made for the area above it, on top of it. You sleep on the bed, not under the bed. It's not made for sleeping under it. It's not made. It happens to be a byproduct, a fringe benefit of having a bed is that you have an area on the bottom. You can store things. You can sometimes go roll back and sleep there if your mother-in-law is home. So you go under if you need to, but it's not made for on top. It's not made for underneath. It's made for on top. So it says the Gemara, Shani mita ho'il ulegaba hasuya, because it's made for the area on top of it. And therefore, it is not a good, it's a very shvach oil, it's a very weak tent. And therefore, it's kosher. says the Gemara, wait a second. You know what else is made for on top of it? Cows. Don't use the area underneath the cow. The cow is also made, you put weight on it, you go right on it, you put a yoke on it, it's everything on it. So how in the world that Rabbi Yehuda himself says the cow is good? Remember, the boy is sitting on the cow, and the cow is an ohel underneath. And yet you say the Rabbi Yehuda himself says that the bed underneath it, you could go to sleep, and you're still in the sukkah. You're not under an ohel. Says the Gemara, Ki ata Ravi, when he came from Eretz Yisrael, Amar Rabbi Elazar, he also said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Shani Shvarim, Ho'il, Ubeginim al Haroim, Bechama mipnei hachama, Ubegeshami mipnei hageshamim. The cows are very different. Because you know what happens when there's a sunny day out there, and the shepherd wants to rest? He brings one of his loyal cows, he tells him to stand right there, and he makes a shade with his body, and then the poor shepherd takes some rest in the shade. So you use the body of the cow as a shepherd all the time for the area underneath it. It's not just that you put stuff on it or you ride on it. You also use it. It's a practical sense. You know, it's when it's raining, they will go take shelter underneath it as well. So therefore, it is kind of used on a regular basis for the area underneath it as well, and therefore it makes a difference. So says the Gemara, "Iachi bitanami hoil umigina al min alim vesandalim shtachtea." The bed also, you always put stuff underneath it, right? You put your shoes under, you put things that you don't need necessarily right now underneath it. You have all kinds of things under the bed, right? So Ela Amar Rava, so Rava says no, that's not the pshat. Shani shvarim ho'il v'asuim lehagen al b'nei me'ayim shelahen. The shidra, the top area of the skeleton of the cow, is a protection, a natural protection on all of their, intestines and inside. Shenemar, as the pasuk says in Iyov, and this is a good pasuk to remember Baal Peh, or basar talbisheni uba'atzamot v'gidim tesochecheni. Right? There the pasuk in Iyov is talking about something else, but nevertheless, it says, you have covered me, be'or ubasar talbisheni, you have covered me with skin and flesh, ube'asamot v'gidim tesochecheni, and with the bones and sinews you have stood me up. By the way, who is me? Right? This is like are you your head? Are you your legs? You're not your flesh. You're not your bones. You're not your sinews, and you're not your skin. None of those physical items is me. Me is the neshama, right? Me is the neshama. Says Hashem, you have covered me with flesh and with skin. Be'or basar talbisheni ube'atzamot, with the structure of bones, skeleton, and with the sinews, the socheni have stood me up. So who is me? The neshama, right? The real me is like an Aryeh Kaplan type of thing. Like I said, if I cut off your hand, are you still there? If I could keep you alive and cut limb by limb, so who is me? If I'm not my hand, I'm not my feet, I'm not my stomach, I'm not my who is me? So to me is the Neshama Torah Shenatata bi, but nevertheless, you see that over here, the language of Sukkah is used in the pasuk in Iyov. Tesochecheni is schach, is cover of the structure. So you see that the body is considered a cover and a protection as well. So therefore, it's not that they're protecting the shepherd, but they're protecting the body itself. So says the Gemara, I could tell you another reason for Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar, so this was one version of explaining Rabbi Yehuda. The second version is that Sukkah dirat keva ba'ida. We need dirat keva for Sukkah. You remember the first very Mishnah in the Masechta? Sukkah she gevoha lemala me'esrim ama psula Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kshera. You remember that? A sukkah that's above 20 amot, taller than 20 amot, is pasul, and Rabbi Yehuda says kasher. Why does Rabbi Yehuda hold this kasher? Because Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds sukkah dirat keva ba'ina. Sukkah should be a dirat keva, a solid structure of a long-term living. So if it's dirat keva ba'ina, says the Gemara, the bed is dirat arai, is a very flimsy structure, and the sukkah is dirat keva, and hence v'sukkah ohel keva v'lo ati ohel arai umevatel ohel keva. If the sukkah is considered quote unquote ohel keva, as a fixed, nice, strong structure, and the bed is considered ohel arai, the ohel arai cannot destroy the status of ohel keva. So if you have an ohel arai beneath the ohel keva, you're still good. Whereas if you hold that sukkah is ohel arai, so you have two temporarily ohalim, one of them could destroy the status of the other one. Right? Simple. Says the Gemara, if you hold that sukkah is a very strong structure halachically, so a little structure of a bed cannot take away from a strong structure of sukkah, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda holds you could still sleep under the bed and still be considered in the sukkah. So says the Gemara, wait a second, you know who else holds that you need sukkah dirat keva ba'ina? We had a whole list of Tanaim, you remember that? The entire list of Tanaim of who holds we need sukkah dirat keva ba'ina, and one of them was Rabbi Shimon, right? And says in Gemara, Rabbi Shimon da'amar nami sukkah dirat keva ba'ina. Rabbi Shimon is one of the main people who holds sukkah has to be dirat keva. And when it comes to our Mishnah over here, Rabbi Shimon says if you go to sleep under the bed, what is what's the halacha? Pasul. You remember the whole story he said? Rabbi Shimon says, oh, I remember when I was in the sukkah with Rabbi Gamliel, and Tavi, his Eved, went under the bed, and Rabbi Gamliel said, you know why he's going under the bed? Because under the bed is pasul. Rabbi Shimon holds sukkah dirat keva ba'ina. He holds that sukkah is considered an eternal, good, solid structure. So why under the bed is considered pasul? If the bed is dirat arai and the sukkah is considered dirat keva, should be good, according to what he's saying. And you see over here that an ohel arai, the bed being a flimsy, temporarily structure, is overriding and destroying the status of your sukkah, which is ohel keva. So how's that work? The Gemara says, no, that's exactly the machloket. The machloket is, can you have a flimsy structure of an ohel arai take away and override an ohel keva? In other words, if I have a good, solid sukkah, and I have a little flimsy tent under the sukkah, does that tent have within its power to override the sukkah? And when you're under that tent, it's considered you're not in the sukkah at all. Or do we say, no, as long as you're under a good sukkah, a little flimsy ohel does not affect your status at all. That's their machloket. Rabbi Yehuda says the flimsy structure does not affect your status at all. And Rabbi Shimon says, no, it does. You're under the bed, even if it's considered ohel arai, still is considered that it's overriding your status because you're under a bed, you're not in the sukkah any longer, and that's exactly their machloket. More savar, one of them holds ati ohel arai u'batel ohel keva. One of them holds that ohel arai overrides and nullifies ohel keva, and more savar and Rabbi Yehuda holds lo ati ohel arai u'mebatel ohel keva. Fine, two dots. We finished this discussion in the Gemara. Now we go back to the story of Tavi, the Eved of Rabbi Gamliel. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Shimon Masechet Succah Avdo. Rabbi Shimon says, so a story with the Tavi, the Eved of Rabbi Gamliel. Says the Gemara, Tanya Rabbi Shimon, Misichato shel Rabbi Gamliel lamadnu. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is. He said, we learned from the talk, from the shmuz, sicha, from the shmuzing of Rabban Gamliel, we learned two halachot, two divarim. A, lamadnu sha'avadim pturim min sukkah. The first thing we learn is that avadim are patur from the sukkah, just like women. And B, v'lamadnu sha'yashet tachat hamita lo yatsa yedei chovato. The second thing we learn is that the person that sleeps under the sukkah, the bed nullifies the whole ohel of sukkah. You're not under the sukkah anymore, and you're not yotzei yedei chovah. You're not fulfilling your obligation of being under the sukkah. And says the Gemara, why do you say misichato shel Rabbi Yochanan, shel Rabbi Gamliel rather? Why not midvarav, from the words, from the speech of Rabbi Gamliel? Why sichato, which is shmuzi? It's a very strange language to use. So says the Gemara, no, he used it exactly b'davka. Velema midvarav shel Rabbi Gamliel, says the Gemara, milta agav orche kamashmalan. Rabbi Shimon is teaching you a side point. What's the side point? Ki hada amar Rav Acha bar Ada ve'amar lah ve'amri lah amar Rav Acha bar Ada amar Rav Hamnuna amar Rav. We learned this from Rav. By the way, Rav is one of the people, Asara Bili de Chasidut ad Rav. We learned this before in previous Masechtas. One of the things that Rav did was he never spoke Sichat Chulin in his life. Everything Rav said, ever, and he had a very blessed life. Very blessed, long life, right? According to Seder HaDorot, he's Rav Abba, the scribe of Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli. Tremendously blessed long life. He never in his life said something that was just off the cuff, shooting from the hip. Every word that he said, it was methodically thought through and chosen very carefully. So Rav is the one that says this. Rav says, "Minayi shafilu sichat talmidei chachamim, even sichat chulin, even a regular mundane talk of a talmid chacham, sricha limud, you need to learn from it. You could learn from it. Here it is. Rabbi Gamliel is shmuzing in the sukkah. You see, Tavi is my talmid chacham, blah blah blah, and you learn two halachot from it. He's not giving a shiur. He's just schmoozing. Afilu sichat chulin shel talmidei chachamim. Tzricha limud shenemar, as the pasuk says at the beginning of Tehillim, ve'aleu lo yibol. That even the leaves of this tree, they're not going to wither out, and even the leaves are going to be used. It's not just the fruits. So the leaves representing the stam shmuzim of a talmid chacham, even that is going to be valuable, is going to be very precious. That again is the Gemara tucked away in Masechet Succah, the Chaf Aleph Amud Bet, a tremendous lesson. One more thing, we end up with this. The Chida writes in several different places, based on the writings of Ariya Kadosh, that Tavi Tavi is a very famous personality. In Shas, we find him also that he would put out tefillin every day, right? The Yerushalmi says over here, by us, and also in Eruvin, Tavi would sit in the sukkah, Tavi would put out tefillin, and the Maran Chida writes that Tavi was the Gilgul of Cham, the son of Noach, right? Whereas Cham was the one that messed up by seeing the erva of Noach, and then he was cursed, Eved Avadim Yelamo, right? Him and his Canaan, his son, Eved. So it says this was a tikkun of Cham. Actually, you can have in Megadim Hadashim, Rabbi brings tremendous insights based on this. It says really the Tavi without the Kolel is Chaf. Is the gematria of Tavi is 21, without the Kolel is 20, it's Chaf. So if you put the Chaf in the middle of Cham, you will have Chacham. That's what he says, he's a Talmid Chacham, right? He always calls him a Chacham, because this is a reference to the Gilgulayos, and also the two mitzvot that he would do are the mitzvot that fix the issue of Re'iyah, because Sukkah, you have to see and remember, right? That's why Sukkah that is Lemala Mispasul, because Lo Shalta Bo Eina, because your eyes can't catch it. Tefillin is also Tzitzit tefillin is because you want to see and you want to remember. And he says, fascinating insight. He says, how was the end of Tavi? The Gemara tells us that the end of Tavi was that Rabbi Gamliel mistakenly made his eyes blind, and he went off the Cherut, Tavi, who was so beloved to Rabbi Gamliel. It says that's why he needed a tikkun of einayim, because his chet, remember, was what? His sin was that he saw the erva of his father, but Shem and Yefet went. David achoranit, they would walk backwards. Ve'ervat avihem lo ra'u, they didn't look, they didn't see. His issue was that he saw something he was not supposed to see, and therefore his tikkun had to come out in this way of the blindness of Tavi, who was the Gilgul of Cham, a tremendous, tremendous insight, also showcasing how everything in the Bria could take hundreds or maybe thousands of years, but it will come back. Whatever has been done in the world, you can never escape. You do something, you see something, you say something, you think something, and it's going to come back to haunt you, whether in a good way or chas v'shalom in a bad way. You do a little machshava tova, a little struggle in the morning to come for the Amud Yomi, to come for learning, and that little struggle counts 1,000 times more than a person that decides during the day, I have nothing else to do, I'm just going to listen to the shiur. Every little struggle and thought and pattern of even looking or not looking, deciding not to look at something, every one of those creates a DNA in our life that circles back, boomerangs in our life, our children's life, and is going to be reverberating around our life and our children's life forever and ever.